And now today's featured speakers are Jaimie Fritz, Bentley University's archivist. Jaimie's career in archives has allowed her to explore a number of different aspects of the profession, including collections processing, digitization projects, digital file management, university-wide and public outreach initiatives, and more. She's passionate about bringing archival material to the community in novel ways and helping to address the issue of archival silences. Jaimie has a background in English literature and women's history and is committed to promoting equality in the archives. As a solo archivist at Bentley, she continues to engage in professional service that helps archivists share resources and leverage learning opportunities as a larger community. Cliff Putney, who many of you likely know, is an associate professor in the history department. His fields of specialization include U.S. cultural, religious, gender, and recreational history, and the history of the Progressive Era. In addition to teaching U.S. and world history, he has spoken at various academic conferences and published a number of historical books and articles. He's currently writing a book about missionaries to the Pacific region. He has received a number of fellowships and grants, including a Brandeis Crown Fellowship, a Smithsonian Fellowship, and an American Philosophical Society Research Grant. And now, without further ado, please join me in virtually welcoming Jaimie and Cliff. Jaimie, over to you.
Thank you, Emily, and thanks, Bethany, for helping out today. Hi, everybody. I am Bentley's University Archivist, as Emily mentioned. I am our first official formal archivist. I joined Bentley in preparation for our centennial year, and I've been working here ever since. So I've spent the last few years really getting to know the school and all of our history. So I'm excited to share some of that with you today. I'm happy to answer questions about Bentley history, about the archives more specifically. Essentially, my job is to collect, preserve, and promote the history of Bentley in our past century plus. So today we're going to look at Bentley history through the lens of the decades. And although Bentley got its start in the 1910s, I'm going to have us start a little bit earlier so that we can see sort of how we ended up becoming the university that we are today. So let me jump on to PowerPoint here. Of course, it never works as smoothly as it did when you practiced it. Let's see.
I can attest that Jaimie has done a tremendous job collecting photos and really archiving the history of Bentley. It's terrific.
Thank you. Did that work? Are we seeing PowerPoint? Okay, fantastic. So I'm going to start us in the 1890s. You can see a picture here of the Winstead Business College, which is actually, I would say, Bentley's direct predecessor. So here's our founder, Harry Bentley. I believe he's in his 20s or so in this picture here on the left. He was born in 1877 in Connecticut, and he described himself as not a very natural student. But fortunately, he found sort of a passion for accounting throughout his studies, and he moved to Poughkeepsie to go to the Eastman Business College, where he graduated in 1897. And true to his sort of entrepreneurial spirit, he started his first business school the year after he graduated. So after leaving the Eastman School and getting his certification, he moved to Winstead, Connecticut, and opened the Winstead Business School, which we saw in that photo on the last slide. And he and his first wife, Jenny Bell, taught bookkeeping and other sort of marketable skills like typing and penmanship and more. It was a few rented rooms in a building in the center of the town of Winstead. And it was actually very successful. It took off within the first few years. And by the early 1900s, Harry was ready to move on to his next venture. He sold the school to an interested party, and he decided to follow a friend who was moving to New York City to pursue some advanced business education at NYU. And you can see here, this is a classroom photo from the Winstead School. It's a pretty small operation. I believe that, I don't have the caption in front of me, but I believe that that's Harry standing over on the left, and possibly also Jenny in the back right of that photo. So that's sort of the first foundations of Mr. Bentley taking a big swing and opening a school. And obviously we all know how the next one turned out. Any questions so far?
Just some reminiscing here in the chat.
Fantastic. Great.
Could I just, I think that very often people forget just how important Bentley's wife, Jenny, was to the success not only of the Winstead College, but also of Bentley itself. She had a great deal of business acumen. In fact, probably more than Mr. Bentley. Mr. Bentley was a very charismatic teacher and sort of entrepreneur, whereas she was very hard-headed and she could keep track of the books. And so I think it was great when you discovered that photograph of her, because I think previous we just didn't know what she looked like.
Yeah, we were really happy to be able to find out more about her and feature her in some of our exhibits in the centennial year, which was great. So moving on into the early 1900s, here is one of Mr. Bentley's CPA certificates, which we have several of in the archives. This was sort of a roving decade for him. This is a very young picture of Harry here that I just really like. I don't know what the outfit is from, but it's one of my favorites. So he pursued his studies at NYU for 2 years, graduated in 1903. He didn't immediately receive a diploma, and he was sort of good-natured about that in his memoir writings. He said by the time they finally got around to sending him one, he didn't need it anymore because he had sort of gone on to become professionally successful. He started working for various bookkeeping firms. He actually started one of his own, a small firm, I believe, in New Jersey. And he got his CPA in a few states so that he could work around the Northeastern area. He became a CPA in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts. So over the course of just a few years, he studied a lot. He took a lot of exams. He had several different jobs. And sort of near the close of the decade, he had relocated back to Boston, and he started working as a business educator again. He was also writing books about business history and business education, and he was working in the secretarial sciences department, or what it was then called, at Simmons College, Simmons University. Sorry, I should know that as an alum, and also the school that would eventually become Northeastern.
It's interesting to note that even though the Northeastern Business School was founded before he became its dean, he was really the one who built it up into something significant. I think it had about 30 students when he went on board there, when it was still the YMCA school. And by the time he left to go to BU, it had, I believe, around 600 students. So, Bentley not only founded us, he really founded the business school at Northeastern too.
Yeah. So that brings us into the 1910s. We can see here, we'll learn a little bit more about the Bentley associates in a minute, but that's Mr. Bentley, a little bit older than the last photo at center there with some of his original Bentley students. After moving on from Northeastern, as Cliff mentioned, Mr. Bentley started working at BU, and he was really a very well-loved teacher there, and also became the head of the Department of Accounting, which after a few years had started, I think, Cliff, I don't know how you would describe it, somewhat of a clash with the BU administration over the responsibilities that were being asked of people who were both faculty and administrators at the school. And in his typical humorous style, Mr. Bentley said that he doesn't remember if he quit or was fired from BU. It's all a blur, but either way, he left in near the end of the decade. And you can see this is the headline, I believe, from the Boston Post, as it was called then, from his departure. His BU students were really upset. He was by all accounts, many people's favorite teacher, and they wanted to keep studying under him. So he was approached by a group of his BU students who asked if he would be willing to tutor them on his own time outside of BU. And he really loved teaching, and he was close with his students, so he decided that he would do that. So he rented a room, and on February 26, 1917, the Bentley Associates, as this first group of 30 or so students was known, met for the first time and started having classes regularly with Mr. Bentley on evenings and weekends. They helped to spread the word about Bentley's classes. They were very committed to his teaching style, and they were great at spreading the word about the school. By the time the 1917-18 sort of traditional school year started, there were about 300 students as opposed to that initial meeting of 30. So as happened at Northeastern, Mr. Bentley was again growing a school very quickly.
You know, to paraphrase Dickens, it was the best of times and the worst of times to start a school of accounting, because 1917 was the year that the US enters World War I. And so many of Bentley's students were immediately drafted, you know, the year the school was founded. At the same time, it was, you know, the federal income tax had recently been passed, which was a tremendous bonanza to accountants, as you can imagine. So, you know, Mr. Bentley started his school at a time that was great for accounting, but also very risky, you know, because of the war situation.
Yeah, that's very true. So I have first of our few trivia questions here. The first rooms where the Bentley school initially met, if anybody wants to guess or happens to know who Mr. Bentley rented the room from, if you can put the letter choice into the chat, see what the most popular answer is. Cliff, you know, this is your question, so you can't participate.
We've got a B, several D's. D's are winning. Oh, some C's now.
So it actually is C. It was the Howell Women's Whist Club, which I personally did not know what whist was. Apparently it's somewhat similar to bridge. And the Women's Whist Club were only using the room during the day. So Mr. Bentley was able to rent it to teach classes nights and weekends, because again, at that time, many of the students who he was teaching would have been working during the day and taking classes at night. So it was a very good arrangement for that first sort of situation of the Bentley school there.
I see Katie Lampley had a question about, did anyone really prominent emerge from these very early years? To my knowledge, the most prominent person was Henry Rao.
Yeah.
For whom the Rao building is named. He was actually Bentley's first employee, aside from Mrs. Bentley.
Yeah,
So,
I would also say that certainly to all of us, the most familiar early alum from those first few years of the school. As Cliff mentioned, the war took a lot of the early Bentley students away. Either they were serving in the military or they, you know, needed to work full time. They were unable to pursue their education. And partly in response to that, Bentley started admitting female students for the first time. This was a temporary situation. Admission closed to women again at the end of the war, although anybody who had started taking classes was allowed to stay. There were a few, I believe it was somewhere around 150 or so women who enrolled and took classes during that time period, but only 3 of them stayed on to graduate. So the photo here is actually Bentley's first female graduate, Josephine Mahoney. There were 2 other female students in 22 and 23 who graduated. And they were the only Bentley female grads for several decades after that. So that was just a very interesting early period in our history.
Do you mind if I explain why Mr. Bentley wasn't really keen on women in his school?
Sure.
Well, you know, I don't want to get too long in here, but Mr. Bentley was certainly not was not a prejudiced man. He in fact was quite broad-minded and progressive, but for his period. But he really, he was very keen on making accounting a profession. It had been a trade, it had been bookkeeping, it wasn't very high status, and he really wanted to make it a high status, well-paid profession. And he had observed that other areas in which women had gained a foothold, like teaching and nursing, for whatever reason, the status of those areas had gone down, unfortunately. And so he felt that if he could only turn out male students, that would have the effect of raising the status of accounting. So he did change his mind, after World War II, but that was his initial position.
Yeah. So those three early grads were Bentley's only female graduates for many years after that, for I would say about two decades or so. That brings us into the 1920s. Any questions so far, or should I?
There was a question about, was there any kind of movement, perhaps, we know, for women in the 20s and 30s to try and gain admission when they weren't allowed?
There's nothing significant that I know of from the records that I have, Cliff. I don't know if that's been any different for you in your history research.
I think the way it kind of got sorted out was that women would go to secretarial school, like Catherine Gibbs, and accountancy was a male profession. So I know that, Harvard had Radcliffe, and so Harvard boys would dance with Radcliffe girls. Bentley had the Catherine Gibbs school. So Bentley men would, go to dances with the Catherine Gibbs women in the 20s, 30s, and 40s.
Yeah.
So as far as women wanting to get into Bentley before the 40s, I'm not aware of that either.
Yeah.
And is there any, do we know if there's any thought to including Bentley history as part of freshman orientation?
I don't know about that on a formal basis. I know that we have new students come through the library. A lot of Bentley freshmen and transfer students take part in our library passport program. I know that we have some other folks from the library in here today. So I get to work with some of them on archival material and information literacy classes and things like that, but it's absolutely something that we're always trying to get more Bentley students to know about the history of the school. And Cliff obviously also does a great job of that too. So,
well, I think all the information that you put up on your website, on the library website, have been really very helpful in introducing students to the history of Bentley. And one of these days, I will actually finish the Bentley history book. I kind of got bogged down in the 90s, and then COVID intervened, and I became history chair and all these things. But I will finish this within the next 10 years. So I can promise you that.
And we also have a new platform for the archives, which is Scholars at Bentley. It's scholars.bentley.edu. It's a space for our faculty research and also some of our student work, but it's also a home for some archives material, and that will be expanding, again, COVID delayed, but within the next few months. We've already shared a lot of our commencement programs on there, as well as old class photos. We'll be adding yearbooks and hopefully also possibly newspapers and or alumni magazines over the coming months. So that will be a space for Bentley history as well. So moving into the 20s, you can see here, this is where our little Back Bay informal campus was forming on Boylston Street. I always just really liked this this photo because you can see we're right across from where you would now find the Heinz Convention Center and the Prudential Center, which comes into play. I saw some of the questions that were submitted earlier were about why did we choose to move to Waltham? That might help answer that question as we move into the 60s. But in the 20s, we start to see a lot of students return to Bentley. The class sizes grow again, partly with veterans from the First World War, also just from new students who are interested in the growing accounting profession. As Cliff mentioned, a lot of things about accounting were changing and a lot more trained professionals were needed. So we moved into a temporary home on Boylston Street. This is the 921 Boylston building. There were also a lot of other rented spaces, some on Tremont Street, some eventually on Newberry Street, a few more on Boylston. So it was this informal sort of urban campus that started developing there over this decade.
That was an old automobile showroom,
Yeah.
921. That's how it started its life. It was a Dodge showroom, and then it became a showroom for Metz Cars, which was a car manufactured in Waltham, actually. And then Bentley, it was a barracks for sailors during World War I, and then Bentley moved in after World War I and eventually bought the building in the 40s.
So one of the other developments over the 20s, as we started to have more space and not necessarily just single classroom spaces, was student life. So this was the decade where we saw the first formal student organizations, including 4 fraternities over the decade. KPA was the earliest in 1922, and there were 3 more. It's so many individual letters that I can't remember all of them right now, but there were 3 more over the course of the decade. We also had an early student council, so they were organizing events, club sports, things like an annual field day, which now is our spring day. That's our oldest Bentley tradition. And just generally sort of starting to socialize more with each other. A lot of students were still working, living at home, but they were starting to create more of a sense of campus community.
The only one of those early Bentley fraternities to survive is Alpha Gamma Pi, which started out actually as a fraternity for Jewish day students.
Right.
There was a big social distinction between the day students and the evening students. And I think we have some really early Bentley students here from the 50s who could probably go into that too. I mean, there were the evening students and the day students, never the twain shall meet, but yeah.
So we have one answer to this question, but if anybody wants to hazard a guess, what building Bentley did not occupy. So we know 921, we had the car dealership. If anybody has a guess here on what the other one was. So unfortunately for the Bentley students, we did not occupy a former luxury hotel, but we did occupy a former coffin factory. There were a lot of recollections from early students about, the quality of some of the buildings. It was obviously a busy time with a lot of industrialization in the city. Bentley we were renting what spaces we could find. So yes, at some point, we did utilize a former coffin factory. So moving into the 30s here, Bentley didn't have any dorms at the time, but you can see from these pictures, this was from sort of a Bentley Yearbook that was meant to attract new students. This was a rooming house in Brookline where a lot of Bentley students ended up living together. So there were sort of communities growing, even though we did not house students in an official capacity at that time. And this picture is also from that view book. I believe this is a lounge area in 921.
The piano, that was, I mean, Bentley was pretty bare bones, and that, there wasn't a gym, there wasn't a library, but there was the piano that students could play in between classes.
Yeah, there were lots of spaces to smoke. There was a piano, and there were some tables and chairs, but it was still a pretty small operation. So surprisingly, in the 30s, there was not quite as much of a downturn as I think a lot of people expect during the Great Depression. In part, I think, and Cliff, I think you've written about this too, that accounting, was still seen as a way to potentially move yourself up economically. So students were still pursuing business education even during that time period. So Bentley was actually doing okay. We leased some additional space in the early part of the 1930s, and Mr. Bentley was still publishing. He published one of his major works, which was the Bibliography of Works on Accounting by American Authors in 1935. And here you can see some of that continuing development of student life. In 1932 and 33, we actually had Bentley Yearbooks for the first time. These are some photos from the recreation pages where you can see a lot of the activities that students were taking part in at that time. This is a question I get a lot for the archives. These were the only 2 yearbooks until the 1960s. There were not any before, and there were not any after this until 61. So unfortunately, we don't have great student records of every year, but these are excellent sort of time capsules for how students were organizing and spending their time in these early years, including some people who had very nice looking cars, if I may say. I'm very jealous of the classic cars. So the first 2 yearbooks, if anybody wants to guess or happens to know, they're not online yet, so I don't think they're Googleable, what the title of those first 2 yearbooks. And I knew that you would get that right. One of my library coworkers. Yes, the Ben Boo was the original Bentley yearbook. I think short for the Bentley book. Cliff, if you know that I'm wrong on that, tell me, but that's always been my guess.
I think you're absolutely right, as far as I know.
Yeah. When I first saw it, I couldn't figure out why it would be called that. And then I thought, well, Bentley yearbook, Ben book, Ben Boo. Sure, why not? Any questions going into the 40s? I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat, but I
haven't seen any.
Possibly missing things.
One of my favorite stories about the 30s is that Bentley used to promote itself by hiring traveling salesmen. So they would go around, they'd find out, they'd go to a high school and ask, did anyone just graduate? And then they would find out the person's address, and knock on his door and say, how about coming to Bentley? And so that was one thing they did. And then another story from the 30s is that Boston College tried to buy Bentley in 1935 from Mr. Bentley, who owned the place. And Mr. Bentley thought about it and kept them on the hooks for a couple of years and then decided not to sell.
So moving into the 40s, you can see here sort of heading into another tumultuous decade. Unfortunately, there's some glue on the back, which are the marks that you see. This was a notice for students who were being drafted into World War II about sort of the future of their education. Obviously, that there would be tuition refunds, and that Mr. Bentley hoped that these students would be able to return and continue to pursue their education after the war. So as again, in World War I, we saw a significant decrease in enrollment from students who were in the military, and admission again was extended to women starting in 1942 as they were training to replace many of the men who had been in those accounting jobs. And this time it stuck. Bentley has been co-educational since 1942. And women's organizations on campus started to form very quickly. So we had, this photo is from the 60s, but Delta Omega, Bentley's first sorority, formed in 1944. And as Cliff mentioned before, Delta Omega was for Bentley's female day students. And then later we had Beta Sigma Alpha, which was for Bentley's female evening students. And there was a significant difference in what the culture for day and evening students would be at the time. Day students were typically, on average, I think, younger, possibly still living with parents, not necessarily working full-time jobs, and evening students, might be more focused on career, might already have families of their own, things like that. So the interest groups were relatively different at the time.
I think there were not that many women students at Bentley in the 40s and 50s. There were, enough to keep Bentley going, but a number of the students who went to Bentley, and women students, were nuns in the 50s. The Catholic churches were sending nuns to Bentley to learn accounting because the priests didn't want to do accounting for their institutions. So interesting story.
Yeah. Yeah, I love seeing the nuns pop up in the 1960s yearbooks. So another big change for Bentley in the 40s was that we officially became a nonprofit educational institution in 1948. So Mr. Bentley donated his interest in the school to this newly formed 27-member board of trustees. All of the original trustees were Bentley alums. Many of them were instructors at the school. Some of them were future presidents of the school or people who buildings are named after now. So Lindsey, Morrison, Rao, all of those names are, with Bentley right from the beginning of that nonprofit structure. And this was a huge change in terms of planning for the future. So becoming a nonprofit educational institution meant that Bentley was looking towards becoming a more traditional college, which influenced a lot of the steps that were taken into the 1950s. This is one of my favorite pictures. I'm heavily biased because it's the library, but you can see how different it looks from the amenities that our students have now. This was the basement of one of our Boylston Street buildings.
Jaimie, there was a question about the average age of students in the 40s. Do you happen to know?
That's a great question. I don't know off the top of my head. Cliff, do you have a guess to venture for that?
They would have been older than average later in the decade because you would have had a lot of returning servicemen whose education had been interrupted. So you had had a lot of people in their, mid to late 20s as opposed to early 20s going to school.
I know there was a question ahead of time too about what the ratio was of male to female students. I know by the 1960s, the late 60s, it was still at about 17-1. So at that time, that would have meant a few hundred, 300 to 400 female students. So obviously you can assume earlier it would have been even fewer than that. So it was still heavily a male dominated school, but women started increasing in numbers throughout the 50s. I think you can see a few female students in this picture.
This library was a huge improvement for Bentley because previous to this, basically Bentley students had used the Boston Public Library as their library. And there was a small, basically a closet in 921, which was the library. So this was part of Bentley's effort to become a college, late 50s, to prove to the state that they deserve, that we deserved collegiate status. We had this great library.
So early in the 50s, we got our second ever president, Morris Lindsey, after Mr. Bentley decided to retire. Lindsey was a Bentley alum. He was an original Board of Trustees member, and he was an instructor. Some of his priorities under his administration for the school included helping to form the Alumni Association, which started in 1955. He was great at organizing fundraising efforts, and he also started helping prepare the school to seek accreditation. As some of you may know from past exhibits and trivia, things like that, Mr. Lindsey was also a painter and a craftsperson. So part of his fundraising efforts often would involve donating his artwork in exchange for donations to scholarship funds or building funds. We have a lot of Lindsey paintings in the archives. They've been exhibited in our library gallery. He was partial to seaside landscapes, which are very, for me, having some of them in my office, it's just very nice and pleasing to look at still. So I appreciate those.
I noticed we have a woman, Ms. Clapp, from the 50s, which is very unusual because, as she said, there were so few women
that's
at Bentley
great.
at that time.
Well, this was reunion in 1955. Maybe we have some people who are in this photo. This is one of the school's earliest reunions, which started being organized every year, as obviously we're still celebrating now with the formation of the Alumni Association and a lot of regional associations, many of which were organized by some of Bentley's female students at the time. Some other changes in the 50s included an increase in humanities courses, again, in pursuit of our eventual accreditation, the expansion of the libraries, as we spoke a little bit about before. The Bentley alumnus here you can see, which is now the Bentley Magazine, started. And if you get the Bentley Magazine, there's a little Falcon Files archives feature in there in each issue, so you can learn more Bentley history or revisit it. And we continue to see student activities expand. So there were more club sports. We have a lot of great pictures of the Bentley bowling team and some other organizations on campus as well.
Can I say a few words about why Bentley became a college?
Yeah.
Well, there are a number of reasons. One was that it didn't want to face all of its students being drafted as they were in World War II and the Korean War. And so the government didn't recognize Bentley as a college, and therefore students didn't get draft deferments, number one. More importantly, the accountancy profession was demanding that you had to have a 4-year college degree to take the CPA exam. So if Bentley didn't become a 4-year college, basically it was going to die. So that was the main goal for Bentley throughout the 50s. We've got to gain collegiate status. So they sent its professors to get bachelor's degrees, they built the library, they did all these things, and then it ultimately resulted in us becoming a college in 1961, 4-year college.
So in the middle of that sort of move towards accreditation, we briefly considered becoming part of another school. It looks like mostly C guesses here. It was actually Suffolk. There was brief consideration of a merger with Suffolk, although Babson would have made sense also, and BU because of Mr. Bentley's history. But yes, there was a possibility at I believe it was in 53 that we could have become part of Suffolk University, but again, we stuck it out and stayed independent. Any questions? I realize the last few decades are going to be a blur because I'm talking longer than I expected, but so the 60s, I think, was defined by the picture you see here and also sort of behind me as well, which was the Waltham campus. It changed pretty much everything about Bentley, how it operated, what students' lives looked like, what the curriculum looked like. We kicked off the 60s still in Boston. As Cliff said, Bentley became a 4-year accredited school in 1961. Our name changed to Bentley College of Accounting and Finance. We were officially a college and with degree granting authority. So you can see here, this is a picture from our first cap and gown graduation at Hines in 1962. The first bachelor's degrees were issued in 64, but this formal graduation was in 62.
One of the requirements for Bentley becoming a college was that it offered liberal arts.
Right.
So that was the rule back in the late 50s, early 60s from the state. You wanted to be a college, you had to offer 40% liberal arts courses. So Bentley scrambled. I mean, they just went onto the streets and hired people off the streets to teach history and philosophy. And it was quite a change, a very, very sudden change.
Yeah, the course catalogs get quite a bit bigger around this time. The offerings expand very quickly. We also got our third president going into the 60s, Thomas Morrison, who helped with this change. Again, this is a photo of the Bentley campus before any of the buildings went up. You can see the sort of skeleton of upper campus right down in the middle of that photo. You can see where the academic buildings would go and where the tree dorms are, where our arena is right down there at the bottom right on that farmland. So as I mentioned earlier, the construction in Boston was sort of becoming untenable. The students were writing in the newspaper about how they were constantly distracted by loud noise, train noise, construction noise. The air quality was not very good. They were feeling cramped. And as this sort of freshly minted college, Bentley wanted to make a change. and started thinking about moving out to the suburbs. And they looked at, Cliff, I know you wrote about this pretty extensively. They looked at lots and lots of different places, and the Lyman estate land that we ended up buying was sort of a last minute grab from another candidate.
Yeah, the DeVincents who own the farm stand, they were not only farmers, but also land developers. And so they had arranged to buy the Lyman estate and turn it into apartment complexes. And the day of the closing, Bentley swooped in and actually bought the estate out from under the noses of the DeVincents, who didn't forgive Bentley for a generation, actually, for doing that.
Yeah, we acquired more DeVincent land later, but that was after the tensions had cooled a little bit. So yeah, a bargain price, I think, probably less than you could buy a house for in Waltham now. We got 100 initial acres of the Lyman estate, which, if any of you have been to the Lyman properties that are part of the historic New England just down the street, that was initially, most of our campus was initially Lyman farmland, basically.
We have someone actually who transitioned, a guy named Ed Haddad, was in Boston and then made the transition to Waltham early on.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I remember reading about people bringing things from the Boston to Waltham campus in their cars. Like some of the library books were moved in people's cars as they were going from one campus to the other. It was a long period of transition. The groundbreaking was in 1965. And the campus opened in 68 with 12 buildings, the tree dorms, and then the sort of core of the upper academic campus. But we can see from some of the pictures in yearbooks and newspapers that it was still semi under construction. There were some flooding issues at first. The students were sort of working out the kinks as they went along. So it was a really nice change in terms of space, but it was obviously a huge undertaking for the school. Yeah, wow, and we have all the tree dorms. I could have made that a trivia question, but I didn't even think of it, but that's fantastic.
One way Bentley was able to buy the campus and build it was that we had a relationship with the Kennedy family. And actually, this is the 60s, Ted Kennedy. He was able to turn the federal spigots on. And I think of the 15 million that it took to build the campus in the 60s, 13 million of that came from the federal government in the form of grants and loans. The tree dorms used to be called the HUD dorms, Health and Urban Development. So Bentley was able to tap Great Society funds in the 60s to build the Waltham campus.
Yeah. I'm gonna try to move myself a little bit more quickly here because I realize it's already 1:45. But moving into the 70s, a very fast-paced decade for Bentley, so it'll be appropriate. After moving to Waltham, a lot of things were changing for students and for the administration as well. Gregory Adamian became our 4th president. And in 1971, we expanded our degree granting authority to include Bachelor of Arts degrees, honorary degrees, and also graduate degrees, as the graduate school would open in 1973. And we shortened the name just to Bentley College, not Bentley College of Accounting and Finance, as the curriculum started to expand. This picture is actually Greg Adamian and Governor Dukakis announcing Massachusetts Business Ethics Week in, I believe, 1977, because our Center for Business Ethics, which is now the Michael Hoffman Center for Business Ethics, opened in 1973, along with Bentley's graduate school. So that was a huge year in terms of expanding the offerings of Bentley, what students were able to be exposed to in terms of coursework and extracurriculars and things like that. So it was a big change in what we were integrating into the identity of Bentley at the time.
Can I give a shout out to Robert Karen and Enzo Robertano? They were very helpful to me in writing about the 70s at Bentley, because they both went there at that point, and they're both with us today.
And they've been pitching in very, very helpfully with lots of extra trivia. Yes, and there are photos of the first Waltham graduation with students walking over planks because there were still some flooding issues on campus. So
one key decision, Damien really made Bentley. I mean, he enabled us to survive the transition from downtown Boston to Waltham. And one way whereby he did that was to build the school's first gym, because he realized if you're going to be a suburban school and attract suburban kids, we've got to have a gym, so they can do swimming and other recreational things.
Yep. And there it is. There's the Dana Center, which also joined campus in 1973. Big year for Bentley. Yeah, and this really helped students sort of start to feel more at home on campus. It led to a huge expansion of our sports programming, including also as a direct result of Title IX, we had our first formal organization of women's sports on campus. I think the first few teams, it was softball, tennis, field hockey, and basketball. Some additional men's teams also formed. There had been a call for a football team for many years, and they rallied a fundraising campaign in 1972 to start the Bentley football team. And we also see around this time a lot of expansion of social clubs as well. There were a lot of cultural, political, religious organizations for students on campus, as well as spaces like the Falcon's Nest, which I think we've profiled in the Alumni Magazine before, which had live music. So generally just students feeling more like they had a home on Bentley campus, as opposed to just a place where you would go to class.
Someone asked before the class even started about the origin of sports at Bentley. And so you mentioned, in the 50s, basically the only sport at Bentley was bowling. And then in the early 60s, Bentley got into varsity sports for the first time. Our very first varsity sports team was a ski team at 62. And then a year later, we got into men's basketball.
Yeah.
And Al Shields was the first professional coach at Bentley. And he basically built up the sports program from nothing into something that was really quite admirable.
Yeah, we had a very early club football team that played against MIT. I think it was in 1918 or 1919, which I still will hold on to as our first athletic success. So a lot of folks might know this one, especially if we have some people who were at Bentley at the time. But while we are the Falcons now, we almost had a different mascot. We'll see what people's guesses are for that. Yeah. Everybody's getting this one. Yep. So there was a vote in the student newspaper to decide on the new mascot. And although the Falcon was not the winner, Cliff, I think that you were the one to ID this, that it was Al Shields who, as the athletic director, decided, regardless of the poll results, we were going to be the Falcons anyway.
Al Shields made that decision. He also decided on what colors Bentley would be. Yeah.
Yeah, that was around the time that the yearbook then started being called the blue and gold. And we were cementing a campus identity, a lot of the things that we still have today. The 80s were the building boom. In part, the building boom had already started, but it continued in earnest throughout the 80s, in part, again, due to Greg Adamian. And here you can see the Adamian Center as it was built in 1983. One of the big focuses for the 80s in terms of curriculum was technology. So here you can see some students with President Adamian and a very large laptop around the mid-1980s. Computing started being integrated into coursework, but also into offices. So faculty and staff were using technology early on. The educational offerings started to include things like information management, and we saw an expansion of continuing education as a lot of professionals were being asked to incorporate new technology skills into their work. Yeah, I'm looking at some of the comments. Those were some very big computers. I don't envy anybody who was carrying them around.
I believe Bentley was the third college in the country to require students to have personal computers.
Yeah, and I think it might be later in the presentation here, but I think we also were wired for internet very early. I think all students had internet access in the dorm rooms by like 1993. So that was also pretty early for a campus. And again, the building of the Waltham campus, the expansion continued. We saw the Adamian Center before. Rao was built in the 1980s. The President's House was built in the 1980s. We had a huge expansion of dorms on campus. So Bentley was becoming bigger and bigger. The student population was growing and campus was growing with it. So the footprint was changing all of the time. This one is a little bit of a trick question, probably an easy one for some people, but we did have a lot of fun, prestigious commencement speakers in the 80s. But one of them was not a commencement speaker in the 80s. Yep. So Dale Carnegie actually was a Bentley commencement speaker, but in the 1930s. So a little bit of a trick question. I had passed away before the 1980s. So I think he was our speaker in 1935 or 37, if I'm remembering correctly. So moving into the 90s, I know we have some 90s alums here. Some of you may have been around for the 75th anniversary celebration in 1992. So this photo is from some of the promotional material for that. We actually have a 75th anniversary time capsule in the archives. Fortunately, it was not buried. Archival tip: please don't bury time capsules. Please just leave them with your friendly archivist. So thankfully, we still have all that material. We put it on display during our centennial year, and it was a lot of recollections from students about what life was like at Bentley as we had gotten through our first 75 years as a school. The 90s also saw, sort of an expanding focus on students who would succeed in a global market. And I think, Cliff, you've written about this. This was a lot due in part to Joe Cronin, who had a huge focus on sort of international education and globalism and things like that. Excuse me. So as part of those efforts, we saw the Multicultural Center open in 1996. That's a space, obviously, that is still hugely valuable on campus today. This photo is from the first space. This was one of the original murals in that space. And we also saw around the mid-90s, the Service Learning Center opened to help students find volunteer opportunities and to help integrate service learning into their work as Bentley students so that they would go on to become great citizens of the world.
Yeah, it was Cronin who realized that Bentley needed to draw in international students to remain a competitive school.
And again, we saw a continued focus on technology. Obviously, it continued to be more and more important in the business world and just in the professional world in general. So the trading room opened in 1996 to help students understand how to work in trading industries. It looks a little bit different now. Again, much smaller computers, but this is a photo of it from after it had just opened. And although it didn't open until 2000, we saw construction start on the Smith Academic Technology Center, which again was part of Bentley's focus on graduating students who would be prepared to work in a technology-focused professional world. Any questions?
We did have a question back when you were mentioning the athletics and the bowling. Yeah. Was it candle pin or 10 pin? What's the question?
Candle pin, true New England style candle pin bowling.
Of course.
Which I still have not tried.
Well, that was co-ed sports.
Yeah, I think post-pandemic we should have Bentley candle pin outings. So getting closer to present day, a name that probably looks more familiar to some of our newer grads, Bentley University. That change occurred in the 2000s. Oh, I'm stuck here. There we go. So the feud with the De Vincents ended, or at least came to an amicable conclusion, because we did purchase some additional land for the campus from the De Vincents, which helped us to expand our athletics fields and also our dorms. Joe Marone was part of this, our sixth president. The early 2000s, we saw Copley North and South, as well as the North Campus apartments, start to accommodate more and more students at Bentley. And as we had more students on campus, we got our student center, which has had a very lovely renovation recently. And that became a hub for students to socialize, but also for student organizations to have space to hold events. And it's obviously still the center of campus today. So we also had, as part of our pursuit of becoming a university, we welcomed our first PhD students in business and accountancy. We saw a huge expansion of our slate of graduate offerings, including the MBA programs, and a restructuring of the undergrad liberal arts curriculum, again, around the middle of the decade. So with all of that added up, that helped contribute to us officially becoming Bentley University in 2008. Our last name change of the first 100 years. We went through quite a few. In the 2010s, this is a photo from our centennial reunion celebration, which some of you may have been at, and Mr. Bentley, the bust of Mr. Bentley made it there for the celebration. So he was there to party with everybody. We had a few changes over the last decade. Here you can see the benefactor wall, which was part of our centennial celebration. The Gloria Larson Center for Women in Business launched in 2011, which again, to this day is helping students and businesses create equitable futures for women. We also had the Prepared You project, which for many years was helping to I'm sorry, I'm reading the chat with one eye and presenting with the other. We had the Prepared You project for millennial leaders. And we also, again, had some more restructuring of our master's programs to keep up with changing needs for higher ed. Again, we celebrated our centennial in 2017 with a year-long slate of programming. We also had a major win for our fantastic Office of Sustainability with our new multipurpose arena, which was certified LEED Platinum and opened in 2018. And hopefully that will see some more fun use in the coming years. And just as a little bit of trivia, as I'm sure most of you have heard, the court in the arena is named after our coach, Barbara Stevens, who was just added to the Basketball Hall of Fame. So that's fantastic news, and obviously will be part of the archives now.
Jaimie, I see a lot of people putting historical tidbits in the chat.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that you would welcome, emails regarding history.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
So would I actually. I'm happy to accept those too. I'd love to, but so yeah, people have things to write down, reminiscences. We would love to collect them.
Yeah, if anybody would like to contribute your memories to the archives, or if you have questions about the archives, you can email me, jfritz@bentley.edu or archives@bentley.edu. Either one will get to me. So that leaves us with our most recent decade, which has been a little tumultuous, but I think we're on a good path now. We unfortunately kicked it off with a global pandemic, but I think Bentley has been very resilient through that. We got to celebrate our commencement this year at Fenway, which was a very historic event, and I think a great way to end a very tough year for some of our students. We also have had the excellent work over the past year of our racial justice task force, which is helping to make more equitable, sustainable structures at Bentley. And just recently we have the announcement of our new DEI major and the first Gen Presidential Fellows program, which will help Bentley immensely in the coming years. So those are some great developments. Obviously, this decade is still largely unwritten, but I'm looking forward to collecting the history of our next few years. So that gets us up to today and now. And if anybody has any last questions, I'm sure Cliff and I are happy to answer them.
If you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat, or if you'd like to raise your hand, thank you, Jaimie and Cliff, for sticking around. If you'd like to use the raise your hand function, it's located right at the bottom, your reactions. You can raise your hand if you want to have a question or make a comment in these last remaining moments. And lots of kudos. So thank you, Jaimie and Cliff.
Yeah, and I'll be going back through all of these comments to see the trivia tidbits that I missed, because obviously I've only been at Bentley for a few years, but it's always great to hear what everybody's experiences were like, because there are so many decades where we don't have as many records as I would like. So I'd be happy to hear from anybody who wants to share what their experiences were.
And feel free to send us your photos for Throwback Thursday. You can send them to alumni@bentley.edu. We'll also follow up with a recording of today's event so that you can revisit it along with your memories. All right, well, without further ado, thank you all for joining us. Please join us for more reunion virtual events this week. And next year, we'll all be back on campus. So stay tuned for that too. Thank you and stay safe, everyone.